On November 11th, 2012, Square Enix stopped sales of Final Fantasy XIV's 1.0 release and shut down the game's servers after an overwhelmingly negative reception, amassing a small player base that only got smaller. Nearly 10 years later, on December 15th, 2021, Square Enix halted sales of 14 for the second time. A week prior to this, the long-anticipated next expansion, Endwalker, was released. It was met with such overwhelming praise and adoration that the game's number of concurrent players reached an all-time high. There were, quite literally, too many people playing the game. The influx of players led to massive login queues, meaning that anyone who wanted to hop on and play had to wait for someone else to log out and make room for them. This meant absurdly long waiting times, upwards of 8 hours if you were on the most populated servers. With so many players, and even more looking to try this game for the first time, Square Enix did the only thing they could to stem the tide: stop sales of the game and creation of new accounts. Perhaps the only example of a game being too successful, too popular, it's indisputably the greatest comeback story in gaming. When I began this series of reviews, I chose to cover Final Fantasy XIV because it was interesting. MMOs were outside my gaming wheelhouse, and seeing how that rags to riches story of its development manifested in the game itself was enticing. All I had to do was look at the game for what it was, honestly commend it for its efforts, and critique it for its faults. A Realm Reborn was a curiosity, far more interesting for what it represented than for what it actually was. Each expansion built on the game to the point that I was genuinely enjoying my time playing it, but it wasn't until Shadowbringers that I truly understood why so many loved this game. I took a several-month break from the game after completing it, figuring that after forcing myself through hundreds of hours of one game, I would appreciate some time away. As Endwalker's release drew near, however, I realized I never stopped thinking about 14. Its story, its characters, how it felt to be in that world. I started getting excited about trying out different jobs, dipping my toes into harder content, maybe even trying crafting. I wanted to play more Final Fantasy XIV. That desire carried me through Endwalker, and after seeing the story through to its conclusion, it's only grown. I wholeheartedly consider Endwalker to be one of the greatest games I've ever played, but beyond that, it's a game that's become deeply important to me. That presents many issues when it comes to writing about it. If you're covering a game out of curiosity, you don't feel much responsibility to make it look good or bad. There's no desire beyond discussing the topic on its merits and idiosyncrasies. If you happen to miss or overlook something, perhaps it was the game's fault for not making it clearer. Perhaps that aspect simply wasn't interesting enough to discuss. Discussing a game that means something to you is a whole other beast. Now there's a sense that if others don't see the game's greatness, it's not because the game isn't good, it's because you failed to effectively convey its quality. There's a lot more culpability in a video like this. The intent moves beyond analyzing the game to evangelizing for it. But I don't think a game like Endwalker needs anyone to prop it up. It's quite capable of standing on its own. Thanks to the machinations of the Telophoroi, led by the Ascian fan Daniel, the planet has become infested with eldritch towers. Beast tribes are being abducted and put inside these towers, their ether siphoned from them and used to create primals. Fandaniel's ultimate goal is the death and destruction of the planet itself, and with the militaries and militias of the world pushed to the brink fighting primals, it looks like that goal might be achieved. Things truly could not be much worse for Heidelin's people, but Endwalker chooses not to open on such a dour note. Instead, it chooses to start the game with something it'll be doing consistently throughout, paying off what previous expansions set up. The Scions of the Seventh Dawn sail to Sharlayan, an isolationist island nation that has been mentioned constantly since the game's original release, but not yet seen. Most notably, it's the home of Alphino and Alice. Their return home isn't the happiest occasion, though, not just due to the state of the world. In the last patch before Endwalker, the twins' father Fortuno came to Eorzea to inform them that Sharlayan would not be assisting in the fight against the Telophoroi. It was known that the small nation was firmly anti-war, but most assumed that present circumstances would force them to act. Not only did Fortuno decide not to act, he excommunicated Alphino and Alice from the family for their insistence on fighting. Things as they are, however, the Scions can't take no for an answer. After some casual subterfuge to be allowed in the city, the occasion is surprisingly joyous. Apart from the twins, several other Scions have either lived in or visited Sharlayan in the past, and waste no time showing the Warrior of Light around. Charlene's primary concern has always been the seeking and preservation of knowledge, and combined with their disapproval of war, that gives its people a sense of superiority over other nations. One need only look at the place to understand that. The architecture is immaculate, clearly inspired by ancient Greece. Clean white marble permeates the entirety of the city, with tasteful fountains and waterfalls scattered throughout. It's not completely sterile, there is vegetation, but is mostly found in the residential district that's populated entirely with mansions. If this is where he grew up, it only makes sense Alphino had the confidence he could be Eorzea's savior when he arrived there so long ago. But even back then, he was positively rustic compared to Sharlayan's other residents, all absorbed in their own research or task to the detriment of all else. The local delicacy is the Archon loaf, an efficiently named bread whose defining feature is its utter lack of taste. When the player tells the citizenry that their occupation is adventurer, they scoff and stop just short of branding them as savage. This attitude is what ultimately kills the mood before the Scions even get to plead their case before the council that rules the city. Dealing with the Sharlayans would be frustrating even if the fate of the world didn't hang in the balance, but unfortunately, it does. The council claims that they have an undertaking whose importance is so profound that it takes precedence over even the end of the world, but refuse to tell the Scions, or anyone else for that matter, what that undertaking is. In actuality, they cannot tell anyone what this objective is. When someone joins the council, they're put under a spell that literally prevents them from discussing the matter with the public. It's clear from Fortuno's demeanor, though, that he doesn't need magic as an excuse to deny the Scions the information they seek. The twins have always been 14's standout characters, so seeing their father be one of its least likable is disappointing, to say the least. He's brimming with disgust in every interaction, treating his own children most cruelly of all. He's cold and analytical and little else. It makes it all the more impressive that the twins turned out as compassionate as they did, but Alice especially shows the scars his relationship has left with her difficulty processing emotions. Without personally killing anyone, without even having a necessarily evil agenda, Fortuno reaches the upper ranks of 14's antagonists. In a situation such as this, inaction is tantamount to consent. As Louis Sois, Fortuno's own father, so eloquently put it, to ignore the plight of those one might conceivably save is not wisdom, it's indolence. Despite all of that, there's a constant sense that Fortuno's disposition ultimately comes from a place of love. He deeply believes that whatever he and the council are working towards is the only viable course of action, and his actions against his children are coming from a place of frustration that they can't see the things the way he does. This is supported by his wife Emilience, who remains loving to their children, even monetarily supporting the Scions behind her husband's back. She tells him of his constant worry for the two of them on their adventures, and assures that, despite his current attitude, he's always loved his children above all else. It gives Alphino and Alice some comfort, but at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. Knowing the council won't give them what they want, the Scions investigate the city's secrets on their own, leading them to the expansion's first enemy-filled zone, Labyrinthos. If Sharlayan's massive library wasn't a testament to the nation's thirst for knowledge, Labyrinthos certainly is. Part zoo and part greenhouse, it's a self-contained ecosystem located beneath the city. The Sharlayans see the value in having authentic samples on hand for any topic they might want to research, and so plants and animals from all over the planet are brought here and allowed to roam free in a synthetically natural habitat. The Scions notice signs that suggest Sharlayan is hoarding more supplies here than usual, a hint at what this secret plan of theirs might be. Signs seem to suggest that Sharlayan isn't planning to avert the end of the world, merely survive it. Time will tell if they plan to let others join them, or if they will remain isolationists to the end. Exploring Labyrinthos takes up one of the two split quest lines that have become traditional to start each expansion. The other quest line takes the player to the island of Thavnair, another city-state that's been mentioned but not shown. Pursuing the Sharlayan lead first can have the player get a bit lost in the sauce, removed from what's actually happening to the world as they try to save it indirectly. Arriving in Thavnair dispels that feeling instantly. Its merchant economy is devastated, with all the nations that they typically do business with too busy fighting the Telophoroi to send ships to a distant island. Starvation would be enough to worry about, but one of the Telophoroi's towers sprouted here as well. The Elephant Akasadara people are suffering the same fate as Eorzea's beast tribes, being taken and used as batteries to summon primals. Thavnair isn't rich in resources like Sharlayan, so they don't have the luxury of simply ignoring the world's troubles, but the world is being forced to ignore Thavnair. Throughout Endwalker, Thavnair consistently gets the short end of the stick as far as dealing with the end of the world. The constant sorrow is juxtaposed by Thavnair's beautiful scenery. 14 has locales that are more fantastical and interesting, but out of the more realistic areas, Thavnair is probably the most striking. The beaches and jungles and rocky plains are characterized by an intensely vibrant pink buried into the stone and dirt. The prismatic buildings give a sense of life and culture all on their own. Pair them with the elephant-like locals, and Thavnair is 14's take on India. It's interesting to see what real-world nations the game chooses to translate to its setting. Lots of places are inspired by the real world, but none are so directly analogous to Earth as the nations based on Asian cultures. It's likely due to the fact that Western cultures are more baked into the foundation of fantasy, so a standard fantasy setting is already an amalgamation of many Western stereotypes. The decision to make the Asian-inspired nations such one-to-one adaptations of each place rather than meld them together the same way European influences are makes each of them stand out from Eorzea. They feel fittingly foreign from where the player comes from, and the singular influence doesn't make each place feel any less fleshed out. Sharlayan and Thavnair seem to be deliberately compared and contrasted to each other. Both are isolated city-states, but one chooses to be while the other doesn't, and both have a deep culture of science. Whereas Sharlayan is pragmatic and logical with its research, Thavnair is more esoteric and spiritual. There's a group of alchemists who are working against the influence of the towers, experimenting with ether and dragon scales to create fields of resistance. The scientists of Thavnair are the first to note a second force in the universe, one other than ether. They call it Akasha, a force that influences and is influenced by emotion. Between ether and Akasha, Akasha is, funnily enough, the more ethereal force. It's largely unstudied, and few cultures have even made note of it. It could seem like spiritual nonsense from a less empirical culture if evidence of it wasn't discovered in Labyrinthos. It's said to change color to match the emotion of those surrounding it, a phenomenon that Sharlayan's brilliant scientists have never been able to explain. Though they lack Sharlayan's wealth of knowledge, the alternate worldview of Thavnair's alchemists proved to be a boon to the world. Those experiments against the tower's influence bear fruit, with the alchemist creating a medallion that can completely negate the tower's effects. Even while facing the brunt of the world's threats, Thavnair is able to provide the world with an essential tool against the Telophoroi. With that, all that's left to do is infiltrate the towers and destroy them. It seems the game has just begun and the path to victory is already clear. Perhaps that's why Fandaniel so readily lays out his motivations. Before awakening to his memories as an Ascian, Fandaniel lived in the ancient Alagan civilization as a scientist named Amon. He performed all manner of despicable experiments, all in service to Alag's emperor Zand. When Zand died, he was later resurrected, but he was never the same. His experience with death left him with the realization that life had no meaning, and he began to wish for the death of everything. That wish brought Alag to its end, but Amon was rescued by Emmet Selk, who awakened the memories of Fandaniel within him. He never quite related to his Ascian memories, however, since he had lived a full life as someone else before he received them. He had no connection to the Ascian world, and didn't care to resurrect it. With the memories of two supposedly perfect societies crumbling around him, the futility of existence made clear, the only desire that remained for Fandaniel was to honor the wishes of his emperor and end all life. As far as villains that want to destroy the world go, it's a much more compelling argument for how someone could reach that point than most. Now there really isn't anything left to do but defeat the Telophoroi. All the cards are on the table. The Eorzeans could go around destroying each tower one by one, but the Scions deduce that the first tower that was created is likely the source all others came from. The only issue with reaching it is that it's located in the capital of Garlemald. The Garlean Empire, scourge of the planet since the game's earliest years. A realm reborn focused on pushing them out of Eorzea. Stormblood was entirely about freeing the lands they'd subjugated. Shadowbringers showed the world on the brink of war before the Scions got whisked away to the First. Here, at the end of the saga, the Scions finally march on Garlemald, and they're not alone. A squadron of allies from across all the expansions, known as the Ilsabard contingent, join them. Lindenleminsen pirates, Gridanian healers, Ul'dan soldiers led by Raubon's adopted son Pippin, Al-Ra warriors of the Azim Steppe, Lys and a squad of Alamegans. At the head of all of them is Lucia, an Ishgardian warrior who defected from Garlemald that featured prominently in Heavensward. It's all built to this, all the lands Garlemald has harmed coming together at last to put an end to everything. Here's where Endwalker shows off its big new mission type, stealth missions. They're a mixed bag all in all, but the game puts its best foot forward first. Before the contingent can reach Garlemald, they need to break through some Telophoroi defenses. Part of that is a large-scale battle in which the player controls several members of the Scions, a recipe the game has become adept at that's always satisfying. Better than that is a covert military base infiltration mission as Thancred. He has invisibility, smoke bombs, instant takedowns while stealth. If you're spotted, you need to take down the enemy who saw you before the base is alerted to your presence. Maybe it isn't the most fleshed out stealth gameplay, but it's a wonderful change of pace and a standout set piece. Plus, the sneaking around mechs in a snowy military base really evokes Metal Gear Solid. If you're going to try and add stealth to your game, you might as well mimic the best. Despite this early conflict, the Ilsebard contingent's mission isn't one of conquest. That wouldn't fit for the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. Their mission has always been one of compassion and understanding. The Ilsebard contingent has come to save Garlemald. Fandaniel's plans began when Xenos returned from the dead and killed his father, the Garlean Emperor. The assassination threw Garlemald into civil war, with massive swaths of the capital destroyed and thousands killed. When the primary tower was erected in the center of the city, a majority of the Garlean population was tempered, becoming fully under Fandaniel's control. This army of husks became the Telophoroi, being used to create and maintain the towers. The Scions have a cure for tempering, though, and with the devices from Thavnair, tools against further people becoming tempered. The goal is not to only destroy the Great Tower of Babel, but to also save and protect the Garlean people. This is far easier said than done. Garlemald has an intense culture of propaganda, leading all of its citizens to believe the nations outside its borders are savages that must be conquered for the good of the world. When the Scions do find survivors, they're intensely distrustful. Nothing can convince them that the Ilsebard contingent has come to do anything but pillage the scraps of the Empire. The player, accompanied by the twins, come across a small encampment of survivors and begin doing all manner of chores and supply gathering to show their good intentions. It doesn't work. Alphino is attacked the moment he's alone, and the two youngest girls of the group run for their lives. Their corpses, mangled by wandering beasts, are found soon after. It's beyond tragic, even more so seeing Garlemald in all its lack of glory. The homeland that soldiers have fought so hard for is nothing but a frozen wasteland. It's only scraps of civilization laid to waste by a feudal and orchestrated civil war. The nation itself has been a farce from the very beginning, having been founded by Emmett Selk as a force of chaos to bring this world to ruin. And yet, the propaganda has been so strong that the populace believes it's society's last bastion on a mission to unite the world in peace. The people believe that Garlemald will not end, it will rise again. Some even think that their late emperor still lives, faking his death to return and build Garlemald even stronger than before. All the anger the player might feel at this place, all of its weight as a malevolent force, it all melts away when the player sees how pathetic it is, how pitiable its people have always been. The last scraps of the military are found hiding in underground railway tunnels, slowly dying from the cold and from hunger. The Warrior of Light and the twins once again venture out to assist them, to speak to their commander and convince them that they have come to help. The commander doesn't disbelieve them, he just doesn't care. His pride and love of Garlemald is too strong, and the idea of his people living as symbols who are rightfully scorned is less preferable than dying for absolutely nothing. So, he takes the twins captive, using them as bargaining chips with the Ilsebard contingent. It's good that I am not a member of the Scions, because in that moment, I was more than happy to grant the Garleans' death wish. The Warrior of Light seems eager as well, but Alphino remains level-headed as ever, determining to save these people no matter what. While captured, the three Scions accompany a young soldier named Euless on scavenging missions. These quests have you digging through wrecked war machinery for drops of oil to keep people from freezing to death. Most of the machines are empty. You go swimming through frigid, sickly waters that actively damage you to scrounge for whatever supplies you can. All the while, Euless regales you with stories of how the park used to be a place of joy, how despite the freezing climate, the lantern-lit night streets were always bustling with people, how he had to kill his family with his own hands when they fell under Fandaniel's control and attacked him. They're not the most exhilarating quests, but it sure does get across just how much the Garleans are running on fumes. When the group returns with their supplies, the Garlean commander makes one final order. The oil won't be used to keep the heaters running. It'll be used to power their Magitech armor, and these last brave soldiers will suicide bomb the Ilsebard contingent. a final act of defiance against life for the good of no one. Fortunately, before the attack can begin in earnest, word comes from one other Garlean squadron that fled to Eorzea. They've contacted Eorzea's leaders and assured safety and rescue for the people of Garlemald. The war is over. The Garlean commander shoots himself in the head, choosing to die for his pride. The others, luckily, choose to live. A melancholy ending to Garlemald, save for one last twist. The Tower of Babel lets out a final tempering wave in an attempt to turn all the rescued Garleans. Before the player can act, they're teleported away by Fandaniel himself. This begins the best quest in all of Final Fantasy XIV, In From the Cold. The Garleans have been shown to have body-swapping technology in the past. Xenos himself lived in a random soldier's body while his was being puppeted by an Ascian. Nevertheless, when the player wakes up at a dinner table across from Xenos, being waited on by Fandaniel, and finds that they're in another body, it's a shock to say the least. The dinner is just theatrics, something Fandaniel is fond of. Neither the Warrior of Light nor Xenos are concerned with it. The concern is back at camp, with the Scions and the rescued Garleans. Xenos' concern is with the player. At this point, Xenos as a villain has been rendered inert. He fits Stormblood very well, a straightforward story with a straightforward villain. Now, there are more pressing matters. Why would I care that he wants to fight me? I don't want to grant his wish, and I've already beat him before. How could Xenos be a threat again? Maybe if you were weaker in a different body. Maybe if he was in your body. That would be concerning. When Xenos gets up from the table and takes control of the Warrior of Light's body, it's clear that this could be very, very bad. Xenos heads towards the Scion's camp, and it's obvious what he'll do if he's able to reach them disguised as you. You need to get there first. What follows is a gameplay sequence filled with such tension I could hardly believe it was inside of an MMO. You must escape the ruins of the Garlean capital, avoiding soldiers and monsters and mechs, surviving whatever battles you stumble into. Survive is the right word. You're in the body of a simple soldier. You have none of the abilities you're used to, none of the durability. You don't automatically heal outside of battle, of course you don't. You must scrounge for med packs in the ruins, find the keys to a broken mech, and use its weapons to punch a hole through the enemy to escape. Even after that, there's still too many. You join with a few untempered soldiers to fight your way out, but get caught up in a fight with an enemy who's just too strong. It launches an explosive attack, and you need to hide behind some wreckage to survive the blast. But you're just an ordinary person, the cover isn't enough. You begin to lose consciousness, and you have to mash a button to stay awake. You don't pass out, but you can't get up. You need to crawl the rest of the way. So you do, in silence, barely holding on. Of course, you ultimately reach the camp alongside Xenos and are able to get your body back, but In From the Cold is a wake-up call. It shows the reality of the battles that have been happening all this time, not from the perspective of a hero, but from a normal soldier. It lights a fire in the player, the urge to finish this at an all-time high. Thankfully, the mission is swiftly followed by the infiltration of the Tower of Babel. What would be the standout dungeon in another expansion is the middle of the road here, a signifier of the incredible quality of the dungeons and trials that follow. More and more, 14's dungeons have structured themselves in sections, with each third featuring unique scenery that sets it apart from the other sections. The Tower of Babel nails this, starting on the top of a train, riding through Garlemald subway to reach the tower, and ending at the top of the H.R. Geiger-inspired building. What really sets it apart is the way that all the Ilsebard contingent joins the fight. Each faction is present, branching off at different points to hold off enemy hordes. It's not large scale, but this is an assault. The feeling of everyone coming together is superior even to the Hero's Gauntlet from Shadowbringers, since the characters are marching right alongside you instead of fighting from the sidelines. That sense of camaraderie with the cast is why I couldn't imagine playing it without the trust system. This option was one of Shadowbringers' few disappointments for me, since using it made dungeons take significantly longer and punish mistakes more harshly. I'm not sure what exact changes were made, but the AI companions in Endwalker feel more efficient. Enemies die quicker, and allies take less damage. Dungeons still take longer overall, but it's less of a trade-off than it used to be. There's also a new character that can join in, Asinian, giving players a welcome melee DPS option. The context of each dungeon in Endwalker really makes it feel like taking the Scions with you is the correct choice. so the strides to make it as enjoyable a choice as possible are greatly appreciated. Waiting at the end of the Tower of Babel is the ultimate primal, Anima, Fandaniel's most prized creation. Garlemald's anti-religious nature is its defining feature. The presence of religion in primals was the pretense for their invasion of Eorzea. Garleans have never had a primal, but the only criteria for creating one is strong belief. Religion is an excellent way to achieve that, but it's not strictly the only way. Garlemald has created such a cult of personality around its emperor that the population's devotion was indistinguishable from religious devotion. Using the emperor's corpse as a conduit, Fandaniel was able to channel that nationalism and create Anima. It really would make more sense if it was named Varus after the emperor, but using the name Anima is a legacy Final Fantasy reference, keeping in line with other primals. Past Anima lies Fandaniel and Xenos, the Scions reaching them just as they're bringing their plan to fruition. The purpose of the towers was to siphon an extraordinary amount of ether and pool it in one location. Fandaniel activates Babel's primary function, an ether cannon, aimed straight at the moon. 14's 1.0 release came to an end when the smaller of Hydaelyn's two moons, Dalamud, was revealed to be an Allagan creation, used to seal the primal Bahamut within it. Dalamud's destruction and Bahamut's return brought the cataclysm that was that game's finale. As it turns out, both of Hydaelyn's moons are prisons created by ancient civilizations. Zodiark is trapped inside, and Fandaniel needed enough ether to break the seal and free him. The Scion's intervention meant he had barely not enough ether, but he and Xenos teleport to the moon to break the seal themselves. The Warrior of Light gives chase. It was always assumed that Hydaelyn was the name of the planet everyone lived on. Even after Hydaelyn was revealed to be a primal, it was never really questioned to what degree the planet was an extension of her. In a similar vein, the Ascians have been shown to have a connection to the moon since A Realm Reborn. Logic would dictate that if the planet was Hydaelyn, the moon must be Zodiark. The moon is just a cage, however, and the planet is much the same. The planet known as Hydaelyn's true name is Aetheris, and Hydaelyn resides in the ether stream at its core. Hydaelyn created the moon to, among other things, imprison Zodiark. By the time you catch up to the villains, Xenos is already in the process of breaking the last bit of Zodiark's seal. Honestly, Xenos is able to break the seal with such ease that I wonder if the whole ether cannon thing was necessary. Might have been more efficient to just have him break them all by hand. Nevertheless, Zodiark is freed, and Fandaniel sacrifices his body to assume control of it. Now, every one of 14's expansions is structured the same way. There are 10 levels worth of quests to get through, this time from level 80 to level 90, usually around 100 quests total. Each zone the expansion introduces usually houses 2 levels worth of quests. This battle against Zodiark, the being that the Ascians have been trying to free since the beginning of the story, happens at level 83. This is 1/3 of the way through Endwalker. Lots of games will have you fight an endgame boss early and force you to lose to show you how much of a threat they are. That's not what happens here. You do defeat Zodiark once and for all. Fandaniel is gone. The towers are destroyed. Garlemald is saved. And then Endwalker begins in earnest. Fandaniel's ultimate goal was not to free Zodiark and use it to destroy the world. He wanted the Warrior of Light to kill Zodiark, because it was the only thing holding the final days at bay. Now, Aetheris faces the same threat that eradicated the Ascians, and if that superhuman race couldn't stop it, how could these weaker peoples? The reality is, they can't, and Hydaelyn knew this. The moon's second purpose, beyond holding Zodiark, was to save humanity. Hydaelyn created the moon as a massive starship, and populated it with a friendly race of rabbits known as the Loporrits to ferry life to a more hospitable star. The realization that everything the player has come to know is doomed to extinction really couldn't be any heavier. Endwalker makes the smart decision to lighten the mood a bit by focusing the moon section on the Loporrits. They're just lovely. That's all there is to it, really. Their demeanor and the antics they get into evoke classic Disney. Each is even named for their key traits in a similar way to the Seven Dwarves. The moon's interior is lined with high-tech facilities, gardens, eateries, living spaces, all made by the Loporrits to the specifications and taste of their passengers. They thought their passengers would be Ascians, though, so all the facilities are 3 times larger than they need to be, and all the clothing they prepared are plain robes. The Loporrits desperately scramble to alter everything they've prepared for the past 1,000 years. This section of the story isn't the most eventful, but the Loporrits offer much needed levity. Things only get darker from here. The Loporrits offer one bit of information that's quite the revelation. As they show the Scions around, it becomes clear they don't have to start their preparations over completely. They've been receiving supplies and information from somewhere on Atheris for the past few hundred years. That supplier is Sharlayan. This is the mission they've devoted everything to. They knew about Hydaelyn, Zodiark, and the Final Days long before anyone else, and were entrusted by Hydaelyn to lead humanity to the moon should the time come. The reason they've sought and hoarded knowledge all these years has been to supply the Loporrits with what they need. Sharlayan wasn't simply refusing to fight the Telophori out of selfishness. They instead took Fandaniel's machinations as a sign that the Final Days were approaching, and doubled down on gathering enough supplies to support everyone on Atheris for their intergalactic trip. This could even explain Sharlayan's historical aversion to war. If they knew that the world would come to an end at any time, that they needed to shepherd all life in that event, of course they wouldn't want to bother with squabbles over territory. Of course they would see war's needless loss of life with the knowledge that everyone will need to band together to survive. Of course Fortunato would see his children's involvement with foreign politics as futile and misguided. The revelation doesn't absolve them, or him, of all their sins, though. Even if their mission is to save everyone in the future, that doesn't mean they should neglect them in the now. The resources at Sharlayan's disposal could have helped countless people in the wake of tragedies. The knowledge they have could drastically advance the technology of the whole world. Sharlayan assumed the truth of the Final Days could throw the world into disarray, but maybe if they let the leaders of other nations know, then the world could be more prepared, or maybe more could have been done to prevent Fandaniel's plans from reaching fruition. This late in the 14th story, most of the Scions have already reached the end of their character arcs. They've all had their turns in the spotlight, highlighting their faults and overcoming them. The only exception is Urianger. He's had a few moments here and there, and his Shakespearean way of talking has always been charming, but by and large, he's been the supporting player to Thancred and Y'shtola. Shadowbringers gave him a new design and a larger role, but Endwalker really rounds him out. He always had guilt for hiding so much from his allies, even though they've never shown any anger toward him. He's ever serious, and he treats each light transgression of his as a complete betrayal. Even his sacrifice of Minfilia to save the First, something that genuinely could warrant anger, saved an entire world from destruction. Minfilia herself forgave him for it. What weighs on him most of all, though, is not a decision, but a mistake. His childhood friend Moonbreda sacrificed herself to aid the Scions before Heavensward, and he's never forgiven himself for failing to protect her. The Loporrits present Urianger an opportunity to once again deceive his friends for the greater good, but he's learned to trust them enough to never do that again. Forgiveness for Moonbreda is something he can't give himself. Urianger runs into her parents on a return trip to Sharlayan, expecting rage for their lost daughter. Instead, he's greeted with a hug. Each action Urianger has taken has eaten away at him, but the anger for each was always inside himself. Now that he's been given for everyone that he wronged, he can forgive himself. Urianger turns in the Loporrits' mission to ensure humanity reaches the moon in favor of siding with his allies. The Scions aren't stupid enough to write off the escape plan entirely. It's great to have a backup, but they can't simply let their world die. They just need some time to think of a way around it, but unfortunately, that's something they don't have. The Final Days reach Thavnair first, the skies turning a meteor-filled red. In the time of the Ascians, the Final Days manifested as a corruption of their creation magic. Monsters apparated in thin air, killing everyone in sight. Things are different this time around. People exhibiting strong negative emotions begin to emanate an eerie aura, and if they aren't calmed down, they become monsters. The creatures are dubbed blasphemies, because there does need to be a cool name for such an important enemy type. It's a downward spiral. The presence of one blasphemy terrifies a crowd. The sight of a loved one being eaten sends them into despair. Soon, they too turn into monsters. It becomes impossible to keep the situation under control, since more creatures could pop up anytime, anywhere. The game couldn't possibly address how each nation is affected by the Final Days in the main story quests, so the role quests take on that burden. They aren't required this time around, but they provide excellent insight into the state of the world, so I highly recommend doing them while progressing through the story. Whichever role you're playing as, be that tank, healer, or one of the several flavors of DPS, decides what nation you'll be assisting. Red mages are sent to Ishgard. The blasphemies there manifest as dragons, an unfortunate form for a place that only recently got over a forever war against the dragons. The mechanics of the Final Days are a great narrative tool. Since negative emotion prompts the transformations, the first people to turn are the people who are already suffering. The best way to prevent more blasphemies from appearing is by targeting the root cause of their creation, so Ishgard's role quests become less about fighting monsters and more about patching up society's inequalities. Heavensward saw the nation face sweeping change, an overhaul of its government and proof that its foundational religion was built on lies. The leaders at the top of the church were rightfully punished for misleading and harming Ishgard's people, and the commoners understandably developed biases against the clergy. But most people in the church were good-hearted people that weren't involved in any of the corruption, facing unjust persecution since the end of the Dragonsong War. Ishgard has been pretending that their nation is finally united, but the situation with the blasphemies forces them to finally resolve the disparities between church and state that they've been putting on hold. This has always been Ishgard's greatest contribution to 14, offering an in-depth exploration of how a nation reckons with massive, instant change, and how revolution, even for the better, leaves some people out in the cold. The Scions do what they can to keep the blasphemies at bay, but it's only delaying the inevitable. The way despair seems to be creating these beasts prompts them to remember something. Akasha, the emotional counterpart to Ether, and the white Elpis flower that seems to react to it. One of Hydaelyn's creations on the moon commented on the flower. Elpis is the flower's name, but it was named after the place it was discovered, an Ascian research facility. It's the only lead that could give the world a way out, but obviously, the Ascians are long gone. Elidibus, the Ascian who became Final Fantasy I's Warrior of Light and Shadowbringers, is trapped inside a crystal in the first. The player retains their ability to travel between worlds, so they do so, summoning Elidibus to interrogate him. He doesn't offer any answers himself, but presents an option no one could have possibly considered. Elidibus uses the remainder of his ether to send the Warrior of Light back in time to explore Elpis themselves. Amaurot was an incredible peek into the world of the Ascians, but it was just an imitation. Arriving in Elpis means the player gets to see the world before, as it was, for real this time. Time travel is an incredibly dangerous thing to introduce to your setting. If done poorly, it can quite easily eliminate the stakes of the story. If characters can go back in time, they can undo any tragedy, or walk back any character development. Introducing it this late in a story is usually a sign that the writers have put themselves in a corner and need to correct something they regret including. Final Fantasy XIV is so delicately woven its setting and built up Endwalker's threat that the worry of how time travel could ruin the story offset any excitement I might have had to explore the home of the Ascians. I should have known better than to doubt the writers behind this game, as this trip to the past not only allows for revelations the player could never learn anywhere else, it also compounds and recontextualizes the sorrow of the Ascians. Elpis is just as verdant and splendorous as it should be. Labyrinthos turned out to be an appetizer for here. Elpis serves the Ascians much in the same way Labyrinthos does the Sharlayans. Spanning several floating islands in the clouds above Amaurot, Ascian researchers create whatever creature sprouts in their imagination, studying it and noting its viability as a being that could populate the world below. The place is brimming with life, a warm gold hue coloring the greenery to appear even healthier. It's a stereotypical paradise, showing just how much of a disservice Emet-Selch's fake Amaurot did to represent Ascian society. Seeing the old world here really shows why Emet-Selch fought so hard to bring it back. Speaking of Emet-Selch, he's here too, and this time, he really is your friend. Elpis is probably the best section of quests in any of the expansions, and that's not because of the insights into Ascian society. Emet-Selch, his friend Hythlodaeus, the confident Vana, and the well-meaning Hermes each establish themselves as fully realized people that rivals 14's best characters, an astonishing feat in such a comparatively short amount of time. Emet-Selch in Shadowbringers is one of the greatest villains in gaming due to his delicate balance between being despicable and pitiable, hateable and lovable, irredeemable and understandable. In Endwalker, though, he isn't yet a villain. There doesn't have to be any reservations about liking him here. Seeing him as a normal person, spending time with friends, shows that who he presented himself to be to the Scions wasn't a front. He's sarcastic and treats everyone with an equal level of disdain, but when it comes down to it, Emet-Selch does the right thing, because he genuinely cares for the people around him. Though he would never admit it himself, Hythlodaeus is more than happy to attest to his friend's kindness. The player met a shade of Hythlodaeus in Amaurot, and met a different shade of him on the moon. Each time, he was kind in a way that seemed impossible for an Ascian, a demeanor he maintains here. Hythlodaeus is the kind of person who enjoys nothing more than seeing the success of the people he cares about. He's turned down offers to advance his own status in favor of recommending his friends for the position. He seems perfectly content with where he is in life, but at times, it's hard to tell if he just knows his limits or if he's suffering from low self-esteem. It's as if he was grown in a lab to be the perfect supporting character. Vana, in contrast, is a main character through and through. When she makes her entrance, there's no doubt as to who she is. Vana is Hydaelyn. Just as Elidibus served as Zodiark's core, Vana served as Hydaelyn's. You would think that Vana must be a calm and nurturing presence, but that isn't the case. She's the protagonist of another story, having gone through the hero's journey before the player even meets her. She took a call to action, journeyed the world, and returned home changed. She's more worldly than the other Ascians, her experience dealing with people from all over giving her perspective others are lacking. It never comes across as stuffy or holier than thou, as Vana is extremely personable as well. She's inquisitive and driven, but emotionally intelligent enough to know the boundaries of others. She pokes fun at people, Emet-Selch especially, but it never seems to be anything other than loving. All that mushy stuff doesn't mean she's a pushover though. The respect the other Ascians have for her creates a legendary air around her, her greatness known long before she became a literal god. If there was any question as to why she specifically was worthy to control Hydaelyn, those are put to rest during her surprise boss battle. She challenges the player, partly to test their strength, but mostly just for a bit of fun. It's a single-player instance, but it rivals the best trials and dungeons the game has to offer. Vana takes on the same jobs that are available to the player, cycling between them as the fight shifts phases. She's a paladin, a dancer, and a white mage. A tank, a DPS, and a healer. Anything the player can do, she can do better. The player's beaten Ascians before, but never on their own. They're lucky this fight is friendly. If Vana wasn't already likable enough, the Elpis section ends with what is perhaps 14's best cutscene. It shows Vana's struggle as Hydaelyn through the years, the destruction of the Ascians, the birth of the new races, and the suffering that's only grown since then. Somehow, the choreography of Vana marching on while becoming bloodied beyond belief manages to convey the thousands of years she's endured in the span of minutes. Scoring it with the theme from A Realm Reborn really pushes it over the top. After the Scions learned of Hydaelyn's true nature as a primal, their trust in her was more tenuous. It was only natural for them to doubt a primal. It's just as natural for them to trust Vana as a human being. The final Ascian, and the real focus of the Elpis section, is Hermes. He's the one the player is tasked with finding, as he is the one who might have the answers they need. That's because Hermes is the one who takes on the role of Fandaniel, who is then put inside Amon's body, who after that takes over the body of Asahi. Yeah, it's a little much. His job in Elpis is the same one Amon had in Allag, working as head researcher. He must be just as nihilistic and immoral as Amon then, right? Not only is Hermes not evil, he's the most compassionate of all of the Ascians. He loves his job as head researcher since it gives him the opportunity to create and appreciate life in all its forms. Whereas the other researchers treat their creatures as experiments, Hermes sees them as sentient beings with a right to exist. Ascian society's view of death is nonchalant. They live forever, so if an Ascian chooses to die, they're celebrated for their achievements instead of mourned. That same mentality is applied to creatures. If a creation doesn't work out, their qualities are taken note of, and they're turned back into ether to be made into something else. Hermes is the only Ascian that can't reckon with this. He cannot understand how anyone would choose to end their life, and sees the flippant destruction of creatures as reprehensible. His appreciation for life is what sets him apart from the others. But the tragedy of Hermes is known before the player arrives in Elpis. Somehow, this man who values the right to live above all else is corrupted into one who organizes the end of the world. The key to Hermes' descent, as well as the key to the final days, is in fact Akasha. The emotional force the Akasadara discovered was known as Dynamis to the Ascians. It was equally as unstudied in their time, with Hermes seemingly being the only one who wanted to know more about it. It was long thought that the final days was caused by a thinning of the world's ether, but that turns out to be a coincidence. Ether negates the effects of Dynamis, so naturally, Dynamis would first affect a place where ether is weakest. Dynamis' role as the key to the final days could come across as a cop-out. The answer to such an important, long-running mystery being, there's actually a secret second force that's super strong and no one knew about it, is convenient, to say the least. Just as with time travel, though, 14 takes an element that so commonly ruins stories and uses it to great effect. The aforementioned way that Dynamis targets society's shortcomings offers a fantastical avenue for the game to tackle some real-world struggles that most games would brush past. On a grander level, though, Dynamis as the Final Days posits hopelessness and despair as the ultimate enemies of Final Fantasy XIV. And really, that's always been the case. The Scions have fought in wars and defeated monsters, sure, but their true goal has always been to get others to believe in hope. In Heavensward, the Asgardians believed that peace could never be made with the dragons. In Stormblood, All Amigo and Doma gave up hope that they could be freed from Garlean rule. In Shadowbringers, so many people in the first, Yulmore especially, simply accepted that the light would absorb everything. All these people and places gave up hope until the Scions gave it back to them. Dynamis just offers a way for the Scions to stop beating around the bush and tackle despair head-on as something tangible. Dynamis isn't an inherently evil force, though. It simply manifests aggregated emotions and puts them into action. There has to be a source of overwhelming despair for Dynamis to become the Final Days. Medeon is an adorable young girl who acts as something of an assistant to Hermes. She endearingly has trouble speaking out loud, though she can speak fluently through a mental connection. She is innocent and pure and cute and kind, and her name means meteor, so she's definitely the one behind the Final Days, isn't she? Hermes created Medeon to be a Dynamis-attuned counterpart to the Ascians' ether-based composition. That tie to Dynamis means she's an actual empath, completely and involuntarily taking on the emotion of those around her. Precisely engineering a character to be so lovable usually has the opposite effect. Such characters are usually endlessly annoying, but Medeon isn't. Creating a character like Medeon for the express purpose of driving her to despair is cruel, but it's so effective. The Ascians strive to reach perfection in all things, but that goal never inspired Hermes. He thinks it's hollow. Once perfection is achieved, then what? What would be the point of living if that goal has been reached? Those thoughts have put him in a slump for quite a while, and he can't accept the idea that life, which he cherishes so, is devoid of meaning. Medeon is his way of proving it isn't. The Medeon the player meets is far from the first. She has many sisters that Hermes made before her. Hermes made the Dynamis beings, gave them a connected consciousness to communicate with each other, and sent them into space to probe other worlds. The question they were to ask these other worlds was, what reason have you found for living? The mission is a hopeful and optimistic one, but the answers they find aren't. Each world they visit is either dead or dying, shades endlessly wandering in search of a way to end their existence. Each planet sought perfection in one way or another. One did so by progressively improving their body with machines to become the strongest race in the universe. When they achieved that goal, they had nothing to work towards, and they had traded their humanity for a machine hive mind that could give no more directives. Another sought to eliminate all sorrow by creating a world of abundance, joy, and immortality. When this was achieved, the lack of negative experiences to contrast the good left each day to blend into a gray, pointless existence. One by one, the other Medeons report their findings and come to the only conclusion they can. There is no reason for living, and the mere act of existing can only lead to suffering. The news corrupts the Medeon in Elpis, and it corrupts Hermes himself. His love for life is snuffed out when he can't find a concrete reason life should exist, and he crosses the despair event horizon. What makes Medeon so much more effective than most world-destroying entities in fiction is the way she doesn't want to become a world destroyer, but she's forced to. If the people she found were yearning for death, by her nature, she has to feel what they're feeling. Making her so pure beforehand is just twisting the knife. Medeon intends to join her sisters and use Dynamis to neutralize the ether on Atheris, and Hermes decides to help her. This leads to yet another top-tier dungeon, Ktisis Hyperborea. Its setting is impressive enough, leading the player through several of Elpis' biomes while fighting the prototypes of creatures that would eventually populate Eorzea. What makes this dungeon so awesome is who you get to fight through it with. If you use the trust system, your partners are Hythlodaeus, Vana, and Emet-Selch. Hythlodaeus is a bard, fittingly supporting his friends from afar, while Vana and Emet-Selch both can fill any role because of course they can. Fighting beside Emet-Selch to save the world is something that would seem impossible after Shadowbringers, but it feels so natural. By this point, the Warrior of Light has told the Ascians their story, how they're trying to stop the Final Days, how it destroyed the Ascians, and how Emet-Selch fought to restore his world. Emet-Selch can't believe this story, not because it doesn't make sense, but because he can't imagine himself suffering so futilely for so long. He's that confident in himself, but also, it's an uncharacteristic flash of fear. The player knows, however, that Emet-Selch does suffer such an existence. This dungeon offers a brief feeling that the Ascians can be saved, Emet-Selch most of all. Maybe he will never have to become a villain. But changing anything here would eliminate the world the player is from, so nothing can change. At the end of the dungeon stands Hermes, Meteon taking off for the reaches of space behind him. Vana gives chase, but only manages to mark Meteon with a tracking sigil before she escapes. To ensure that Meteon achieves her goal, Hermes activates a machine that he was vehemently against the use of just hours prior, one that erases memories. Emet-Selch and Hythlodaeus realize the Warrior of Light's reality will come to pass, that their world will die, and that Emet-Selch will fight against an ally he's come to respect to resurrect a world he could be saving right now. The two Ascians punch a hole in the world to allow Vana and the player to escape the machine's effects, knowing it's the only hope any life has to continue existing. This is how Vana knows what must be done to become Hydaelyn, and what she must do to ensure the player can stop the final days. The other Ascians, Hermes included, forget. It's not as much of a spectacle as the destruction of Amarant, but here in the paradise of Elpis is where the Ascians were doomed. The Warrior of Light returns to their time with a clear goal in mind: find and stop Meteon. The Scions need to get her location and travel to the depths of space, and it just so happens that Charlian has a means to do both. The overwhelming evidence the Scions have as to the truth of the final days finally convinces Charlian to aid them, and Fortuno finally reconnects with his children, lending them his full support. Charlian has been working on a spacefaring vessel to ferry humanity to the moon, and they're willing to let the Scions use it. It just needs a few finishing touches. This translates to the entirety of the level 88 quest being busy work, and the only section of Endwalker to approach not good. The game is nearing its climax, and spending a sizable amount of time moving boxes and showing Loporrits around feels like the game is messing with the player. The quest's sage advice is particularly egregious. The objective is to find 8 people who need cheering up across a wide section of Labyrinthos. Usually a quest like this abides by the rule of 3, but not satisfied with simply bloating this quest, nearly half of the people you find don't need to be cheered up and don't count toward the quest total. With each person I found the urge to yell at them for wasting my time more than I wanted to cheer them up. Even this section, though, is not without merit. It's one last chance for the Scions to relax a bit and enjoy each other's company, and it allows for every nation to show the support of the Scions by gathering supplies. Plus, the dungeon at the end of these quests more than makes up for the wait. The Scions need to communicate with Hydaelyn to learn where Meteon is, and Charlian has a direct route to her. The Aetia scope drills to the core of the planet, reaching directly into the ether stream, Hydaelyn at its center. This is yet another dungeon I can't imagine playing for the first time without the trust system. It's so integral to the narrative that the Scions are making this trip together, meeting face to face with the god that's guided them the whole way. When people die, they return to the ether stream. This means that the Aetia scope is effectively plunging into the underworld, and the dungeon sells that idea. It's effectively a boss rush of minor antagonists, the memories and spirits of past foes intertwining and confronting the Scions one last time. It's not a one-way street either. The friends they have lost also make an appearance. Papalimo recreates his last stand, Moonbrita does the same, and Minfilia guides the Scions on the final stretch to Hydaelyn. It's one last look back on their grand adventure before this chapter closes for good. And close it does. Hydaelyn, taking the gorgeous form of one of Yoshitaka Amano's famous drawings, gives the Scions the information they need, but has one more test for them. They have one last primal to fight. The fight against Hydaelyn is the first 8-player trial that can be played with the trust system. The developers know how pivotal it is for the cast to work together on this. Hydaelyn lets some of Vana show, swapping between the same weapons she used in her duel with the Warrior of Light. One phase requires the destruction of each crystal the player spent a Realm Reborn collecting. It's also very hard, pushing the player's reflexes and intuition to the acceptable limit for a standard difficulty trial. The biggest shock comes at the end, when Hydaelyn begins to disappear. Her ether has grown weaker with each expansion, but she saved just enough energy for this last test. With the knowledge that the Scions are capable to tackle Meteon, Hydaelyn's work is done. Years and years of struggle and pain paid off, and Vana can finally rest and join her friends. When Square Enix promised that Endwalker was the end of the Hydaelyn and Zodiark saga, I wouldn't have guessed they meant that so literally. Before fading away, Hydaelyn offers one final piece of advice. The amount of ether needed to reach Meteon is enormous, but there's a source that fits the bill: the Mother Crystal. When the player first encountered Hydaelyn in A Realm Reborn, it seemed as if this massive crystal was the Goddess of Light. It's been the guiding symbol for the Scions ever since, and having it literally fuel their journey is just perfect transitioning from metaphor to material. It's a big crystal though, and it needs to be broken down to make fuel. That's where a second payoff from this one object comes in. The beast tribes of Aetheris turn the mother crystal into primals, who in turn fuel Sharlayan's spaceship. Even if it's a minor note in the grand scheme, having the primals come together to help the Scions is the ultimate symbol of the Scions' goal to unite the people, turning the monsters they once fought into critical allies. Everything falls into place, and the Scions set sail for the farthest reaches of space. Before long, they reach their destination, the amalgamated remnants of dead worlds called Ultima Thule. There's just enough familiarity to know that people used to live here, but evidence of that is few and far between. The kaleidoscopic nebula that graces the sky gives merciful color to the black and gray ground, supported by vents of green ether fleeing the dead world. The score is an impression of music, the sound of a piano maybe being played down the street, an echo of a life long gone. It's a place devoid of hope, and it wastes no time trying to assimilate the Scions. Thancred doesn't even make it off the ship, being neutralized with Dynamis by Meteon herself. There's no time to mourn, lest the others meet the same fate. Shades of dragons scatter the land, and it becomes clear that this world used to be the home of the dragons. It was established in 14's lore that the dragons flew to Aetheris from another star, but that being more fact than fiction is shocking. The dragons lost a war against that race of mechanical super predators, and with so many dead and their planet laid to waste, the dragons gave up all hope. Since Ultima Thule is a land of Dynamis, their hopelessness has physical manifestations. There's literally no path forward since the dragons cannot perceive one. It takes a pep talk from Estinian to remedy this. Talk alone isn't enough though, so Estinian sacrifices himself, willing a way forward into creation as he is reduced to Dynamis. This act brings Estinian's arc to a perfect close, a man who devoted his life to killing dragons, making a last stand to convince the dragons that life is worth living. Anyone who has seen enough stories like this knows what the rest of this section will be. The Scions make their way through Ultima Thule, beating the remnants of dead worlds, and one by one, they will sacrifice themselves to let their friends continue on. Being predictable doesn't make this any less effective. There's a sense that maybe Stola will survive, if not her, then maybe Grahatia, and certainly Alfrino and Alice can't die here. Nevertheless, they're all gone by the end. Each sacrifice adds new elements to the music, building from that hollow impression into a beautiful ode to the Scions, the lyrics reflecting on the pain they've endured, and the resolve to carry on despite it all. What more can be said about Masayoshi Soken's work as composer? He's simply one of the all-time greatest in gaming. I'd like to highlight one of the dead civilizations in particular, the Ea. They, like Sharlayan, sought knowledge to the detriment of all else. They needed an answer to all of the universe's questions, and realizing that one could never learn everything in a normal lifetime, they found a way to separate mind from body and live forever. With all the time in the world, they managed to figure out the answer to all of the galaxy's greatest mysteries, but they couldn't handle what they found. Their calculations prove that at some point, the universe will cease expanding, energy will stop flowing between objects, and everything will freeze in a thermodynamic equilibrium. The Ea discovered the heat death of the universe, and knowing all existence is fated to end in a whimper, they lost their will to exist. What sets the Ea apart from the other dead worlds is the fact that their discovery is real. Entropy is a likely end for our actual universe, and though it will happen long after Earth will be gone, knowledge of it could lead people to become similarly nihilistic. It's a testament to 14's excellent ability to reach beyond fantasy metaphors and into something more tangible to the real world. Before discussing the finale, there is one nagging presence trying to drown out Endwalker's greatness like a fly in your ear at the symphony. Xenos Ye Galvus rears his ugly head to put a damper on things right when they're at their best. He's confronted late in the game by all of the Scions, but there, he's denied the duel that is his one desire in life. I found this to be a profound and bold move by the developers. Denying Xenos his fight is denying the players a fun battle, but it's exactly the right move. Fighting Xenos would be giving him what he wants, and even if it ends in his death, it gives him satisfaction he does not deserve. Not giving him that satisfaction, and instead having him wander the world aimlessly until he dies a quiet death, is the pathetic existence that Xenos has earned. This time, though, the team couldn't stick to their guns. At the final hour, Xenos swoops in the form of a dragon to assist the Warrior of Light in defeating Meteon. He sees Meteon as the thing preventing the player from giving him that duel. so he agrees to take the rest of the Mother Crystal's power and offer his aid. Xenos does not deserve to play a part in this. Even if this isn't meant as a redemption narratively, it moves the needle ever so slightly away from pure scum, and that's something that doesn't feel authentic to Xenos. He is given even greater importance by placing him as the final encounter of the game. After the real finale, Xenos is fought one-on-one as a capstone to the adventure. He begins it with a speech about he and the Warrior of Light aren't so different, that even if they say they fight for the good of others, part of them does it for the rush of battle and the excitement of a kill. This cheeky nod to players who participate in endgame content, grinding gear, and fighting the game's toughest challenges is a fun call-out for many. I, on the other hand, have stuck entirely to the main story, the characters and the world legitimately being my motivation for playing, so the call-out rings hollow. All that being said, the fight with Xenos is incredible. You can't actually die, so the momentum of the finale is always maintained, but that's also an excuse for the game to throw some crazy moves at you. One of Xenos' moves is a quick instant kill, the main tell to avoid it being a vocal cue rather than an attack indicator. It's backed by Endwalker's main theme, a medley of all the expansion's leitmotifs as well as the main themes of each previous expansion. The title of that song is Footfalls, a name it shares with the area of Thanalan where the Waking Sands was located. And look, ever since Metal Gear Solid 4 did it, I'm a sucker for games ending with an exhausted fistfight. By the time it was over, I had largely moved past my disappointment with Xenos' role in the ending, feeling satisfied more than anything. Maybe there was some truth to what Xenos said about me. After all the Scions made their sacrifice, the player finally confronts Meteon. Saving the world is the standard plot of a JRPG, and fighting a god at the end is equally as common. Those tropes have never been used to such great effect as in Final Fantasy XIV. Sure, in a game, the player wants to save the world. It's generally a nice thing to do, and the game world is usually populated with likable characters. The stakes are higher in 14. The nature of an MMO means that players have a stake in this world. It's a place where some have spent years creating memories with their friends, making new friends, and immersing themselves completely in one of the most complex and fully featured settings gaming has to offer. The end of the world isn't just a bad ending for the Scions, it would be the loss of a place of real value to real people. The determination to defy fate has never reached me as a player so strongly. Alphino and Alice's final act was to convince Meteon herself that life had inherent value, and after some clever maneuvers involving Emet-Selch and Hythlodaeus, the Warrior of Light is able to bring back all the Scions. Together, they challenge the core of Ultima Thule, the universe's collective will to die, the Endsinger. It lives up to its name. One of its standard maneuvers is to generate planetoids in an instant and hurl them at the Scions. It proves to be too much for them, and in a desperate bid to save their friends, the Warrior of Light warps them all back to their spaceship. No trust system for this fight. The Endsinger's face never shows the disdain of Gaius, the confidence of King Thordan, the madness of Xenos, or the desperation of Emet-Selch. The Endsinger's gaze is one of indifference. As it pelts the ground with whole worlds and its black tears drown the player, the expression never changes. The battle gets harder and harder, pushing the party to the edge until one hit too many forces a cut to black. Prayer of the Scions, their wills made manifest through Dynamis, reaches the player. Each individual prayer provides their own buffs, pushing the player past their limits. This phase melts through an entire third of the Endsinger's health bar in a fraction of the usual time. The Endsinger is reduced back to what it is at its core, a young girl who wanted nothing more than to relate to others and fulfill their wishes. Meteon is simultaneously to blame for the death of countless people, and a victim who never had a say in the matter. She never wanted to hurt anyone the way she did, and after everything, it's hard to hold anything against her. Unlike Xenos, she deserves the peace she gets. The Warrior of Light is retrieved by the Scions, and they return home to a saved Aetheris. For now, this is the end of Final Fantasy XIV. The final days will never come again. The reign of the Garleans has come to an end. Humanity and the beast tribes have brokered a peace and are starting to live in harmony. The Scions of the Seventh Dawn have achieved most every goal they were created to achieve. Knowing this, they disband, publicly at least. The organization once existed in the shadows, and it will do so once more. Each of the Scions themselves are going their separate ways, though. Y'shtola continuing her constant research, Urianger and Thancred traveling the world, Grahati and Kryl rebuilding their connection in Sharlayan, Asinian assisting Thavnair, the twins working to rebuild Garlemald for the better, and Tataru being a quintessential Lalafell by being a rampant capitalist. It would be bittersweet if the Scions showed any doubt that they would meet again. Endwalker promised a satisfying conclusion of Final Fantasy XIV, and it went above and beyond to deliver that. Every lingering question, every unresolved arc was capped off better than I ever could have imagined. The only question that remains is what the Warrior of Light will do next. Will they travel the world seeking greater challenges? Will they pick up new fighting styles to keep things fresh? Or maybe, after 300 hours of devoted adventuring, they'll finally lay down their weapon with the knowledge that this place is gonna be fine. It'll be here if they need it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you stuck with me throughout this journey through Final Fantasy XIV, I'll have you know that your support was a great motivator in me seeing this project through to the end. Endwalker really did cement 14 as one of my favorite games, but these videos have given it a special place in my heart. Thanks for watching.